Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. 6 millimetres overnight. Started raining at about 4 o'clock. Soil moisture profile gauge says the dirt is full of water, which my driveway amply demonstrates. Therefore, today, Sunday the 18th of September, outsiders and first dog on the moon will occur inside the hut. Because outside it's 11 degrees Celsius and raining. So, we better have our hit of wildlife for the day. What about you, Chuff? Okay, we will now prepare for the outsiders. Inside the hut.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy and you're not. You never said a truer thing. Joining you this morning, Rebecca Weiss. She's a writer for the Spectator Quadrant, former opinion editor at the Australian and previously an Australian diplomat. Eleanor Jackson's with you too, editor-in-chief of Peril magazine. She's a Filipino-Australian poet, performer, arts producer and broadcaster. Sam Hurley with you, CPD, Centre for Policy Development, Policy Director, working across three big research programs. Well-being is one of Sam's themes. Morning, all.
Good morning.
To our Sydney people, Sam and Rebecca, how's the marathon going out there? People everywhere running around?
I've got to say, Jonathan, that I've always believed that sport is bad for your health, and this marathon has proved it comprehensively. I aged 10 years just getting to the studio. It was so stressful. Every street in Sydney has been blocked off.
Well, it's a big thing, and it goes all over the place. I think people, the half marathon was all finished by 8 a.m. That's how enthusiastic they are in Sydney. A big week in the federal parliament. We had many maiden speeches, but none. Well, this was one 20 years ago, which had an echo this week.
I and most Australians want our immigration policy radically reviewed and that of multiculturalism abolished. I believe we are in danger of being swamped by Asians.
That was 20 years ago. That swamping has no doubt, overwhelmed us by now. What has changed in the 20 years intervening? Well, here we were again this week.
Now we are in danger of being swamped by Muslims who bear a culture and ideology that is incompatible with our own.
Tell me, Eleanor, would you have, like the Greens, walked out of the Senate?
No, I probably wouldn't have walked out of the Senate, but I'm astonishingly civic, and I think that has something to do with being Filipino-Australian and with family who left during martial law, that we actually regard democratic process as this kind of wondrous thing. And yeah, I thought it was a stagey move, but I would have definitely sat in my seat grinding my teeth.
This is a big conversation, Rebecca, at the moment, isn't it? I mean, Pauline Hanson is challenging us with some interesting ideas, and how we as watchers and how we as people in the media as well respond to that is a really interesting question.
Yes, I thought it was very interesting that a lot of people seemingly, on the left find it so difficult even to listen to what Pauline Hanson says, and yet the survey seemed to show, I think an Essential Media poll showed that 62% of Australians say that while they don't agree with everything that she says, they feel that she speaks for a lot of Australians. And I'm sure I'd be one of that 62%. I do think she speaks for a lot of Australians, and I think it's well worth listening to that and thinking about it. In fact, if you don't, I think that really will invite greater problems.
Does that mean, Sam, that a lot of Australians are convinced that 2% of the population is about to swamp the other 98%?
I don't think it means that, and I actually don't think that Pauline Hanson speaks for anything like a majority of Australians. I think the kind of things that she said in the Senate this week, the things that she said 20 years ago are actually pretty cleverly calculated to speak to a very disenchanted and small minority of Australians, and speak to them in a way which is kind of out of step with how we speak to each other about being Australians and about the kind of country we want to be generally.
See, I reckon that's the interesting thing, I don't know, is what the things that Pauline Hanson says actually represent, and this conversation is echoed in the United States at the moment with Donald Trump, which also has a very strong sort of racial focus. I wonder, though, whether that's actually a proxy for more sort of immediate welfare concerns about my job, my future, that sort of thing, and I'm looking for someone on whom to blame that sense of uncertainty.
Look, and I am inclined to agree, and again to echo Sam's comment, I don't think that her ideologies are in step with the majority of Australians, but she does act as a lightning rod for a greater sense of unease, and I think it's sad that she often wants to look down the power hierarchy to understand her feelings of, disease or insecurity, rather than to look more broadly in our community. Is this neoliberalism? Is it globalization? Is it whatever it is that she thinks is a kind of rallying cry around xenophobia or racism? That those things are often not grounded in evidence, and as such I think she is responding in fear, and I try to listen to that fear, but not necessarily to take it as a gospel truth of what the Australian public believes.
Does that sort of fear-mongering, Rebecca, have a sort of a place in our public conversation? I mean, it's interesting that the sort of sentiments that Pauline Hanson expresses have a value of shock because they're not part of what we routinely expect to come out of places like our parliament. Does that bring our parliament down in a way?
Not at all, and I think that what a lot of people don't understand, and I think if you only listen, for example, to the ABC, you won't hear those views expressed very often. But if you go out, for example, I'm in Sydney, and if I go out west to a suburb like, say, Auburn or Lakemba, I, as a woman, with my head uncovered and on my own, no man around, it can be quite an intimidating experience. All the shop signs, you certainly feel like you're in a foreign country.
Have those suburbs been swamped, do you think?
Well, those are suburbs where you feel that I feel as a woman with a part Jewish heritage and as an Australian born, I feel like I'm in a foreign country. And it can be intimidating. And the treatment that I receive as a woman is intimidating. And the treatment that I see, I would be frightened to tell people, about my Jewish heritage, because there's a lot of anti-Semitism. And I think what's happening is that all of this is being swept under the carpet. So in a sense, people feel that when Pauline Hanson comes along and speaks, they think, well, at least now maybe we can raise these things that are worrying us.
Should we, just to stick with that for a moment, Rebecca, I mean, should we, as a woman of Jewish heritage, would you be alive to the concerns of people who are elected into democratic processes with views which are very hostile to certain ethnic or religious groups?
Absolutely, and that's why, I think the great triumph of democracy in general and Australian democracy in particular is that elected representatives should sit together and should listen to each other and try to understand. So I thought the Greens stunt was predictable and reflected very poorly on them, but in a sense it was a very true reflection of a segment of society that simply doesn't want to listen to to other people that it disagrees with, and it attempts to discredit those points of view and to slur them with racism and so forth, rather than to actually say, well, wait a minute, let's actually listen and let's talk.
But Sam, if it looks like a racist and sounds like a racist, isn't it in fact a duck?
Well, it's certainly quacking. Look, I think in terms of how we empathise with other people in the situation, I think more, with the greatest of respect, Rebecca, not about how you feel when you're in Lakemba. The thing that struck me the other day was how would a young Muslim girl feel when she was going home from work on the train after Pauline Hanson spoke in the Senate on Thursday. And she would be completely justified looking around, looking at the other people on the train. Would she feel threatened or concerned or fearful or resentful, questioning her role in her place in her own country? I think the answer to those questions is quite possibly yes, and I think that's the important perspective here. And look, I knocked off work on Friday afternoon and caught the train home on the line that goes southwest, going out of the CBD in Sydney, surrounded by people from all over the world, all walks of life, going through those suburbs in the inner west of Sydney that have seen wave after wave of migration for 60, 70, 80 years. Waves of migration that have made people's lives better, they've made our community better, they've made Australia a better place. And I think the important thing to remember here is that's not an Australia that Pauline Hanson speaks to. It's not an Australia she can speak to. We're better and we're bigger than that. And I think that context is really important to remember.
I mean, it's true, Eleanor, though, that Pauline Hanson does speak for a certain majority, and that's the vast Australian majority that are not Muslim.
Oh, well, there you go. It is really interesting to think about where these majority-minority politics sit. I'm inclined to agree with Sam and to take almost a willful optimism to say that this too shall pass.
Don't you have to tackle? I mean, do you have to challenge the sorts of things that are said there, or do you treat them with respect? I mean, what's the appropriate approach to them?
I think it's appropriate to have a multiplicity of responses, and I think there are individuals who certainly feel personally attacked and should feel personally attacked because the attack is being made so directly and so shrill in the public fora. But also I think there are very many people who are trying to listen and to approach the differences, and within that listening to find great compassion for that fear and then to move on past it, because we are bigger than that as a nation.
Outsiders here on Sunday Extra, Rebecca Whiteside, Eleanor Jackson and Sam Hurley. Now, much of the attention given to Pauline Hanson was around those issues of race and immigration. There's another area in which she spoke.
Children are used as pawns in custody battles where women are make frivolous claims and believe they have the sole right to the children. Children have two parents, and until we treat mums and dads with the same courtesy and rights, we will continue to see murders due to sheer frustration, depression and mental illness caused by this unworkable scheme.
Are we, Rebecca, victim blaming here, the victims of domestic violence and homicide?
Well, I saw Rosie Batty making that comment. I think that we do need to, the actual separate out what Pauline Hanson said, the idea that parents, both fathers and mothers, have rights and responsibilities towards their children. I think that should be an unexceptional statement. And I do think that the family law court needs overhauling, and I think that's the view of many people. There are appalling crimes, that are committed in this context. I mean, personally, the stress of marital breakdown is obviously appalling, and this can lead to horrible crimes. I do think that women have a special bond towards their children. I think it's the maternal bond is something that you see across culture and across time, but I do think it's terribly important to understand the position of fathers as well, and not to sort of write them out or to assume that somehow they have a lesser status. It's just a very difficult and vexed area.
Eleanor, I suspect that Pauline Hanson won't be successful in having Muslim immigration banned, but I wonder if she will have success in raising change to the family court as an issue, and that's a thing which has significant support in certain parts of the country. I mean, is that a campaign with good risk?
Well, look, I think it's a campaign that we risk playing to lovely but essentialist ideas around how we value parents and who is a legitimate parent. I certainly think that the family court seeks to balance those issues of equity and relationship input of both fathers and mothers and other parents. But I certainly thought that the remarks were just kind of lazy and incendiary without really being grounded in evidence, and actually a real disservice to Rosie Batty's year of great advocacy trying to highlight the complex social values and norms that lead to violence rather than simple reductive statements. I thought it was a very lazy and saddening approach really to take.
It sort of points, Sam, though, to the areas in which one nation may actually have considerable political pull.
It does. And as I said earlier, I think it also echoes very strongly with what Pauline Hanson said when she originally came to the Senate in 1996. Exact phrase, in 1996.
Okay. Here endeth this video, new one coming soon.